It starts right about here, and it's just right in position to support the long beard.
The debate rages on.
And I think the beard was original.
The father, Khufu, or his son, Khafre.
We don't know,
The Sphinx's identity crisis cannot be resolved by facial features alone. For more than 4,000 years, this curious creature has captured the imagination of kings and emperors, poets and painters, and presidents. Today, the Sphinx is the face of Egypt and icon of its age-old mysteries. But what did it mean to the ancient Egyptians? The old kingdom collapses, and the Giza plateau becomes an abandoned cemetery. The Sphinx and pyramids neglected. Nearly 1,000 years pass, and the power of the pharaohs rises again in a period called the New Kingdom, beginning about 1500 BC. But centuries of wind and water have eroded the Sphinx's fragile body. And desert sands have swallowed the Sphinx up to its neck. What happens next is written in hieroglyphs on a gigantic 15-ton granite stela perched between its paws. The inscription tells of a hero who rescues the Sphinx. A young prince clears away the sands, and the Sphinx rewards him by making him king. His name is Thutmose.
Who was the first restorator on earth? I can say Thutmose IV. He ordered his people to build these two huge mud brick walls to protect the Sphinx from sand.
Opposite the Sphinx's left haunch and above the Sphinx ditch are remnants of a mud brick wall. Some of its bricks are stamped with the name of Thutmose. Originally coated in plaster, the wall stood nearly 8 meters tall. And to restore the Sphinx's weathered body, Thutmose placed large blocks of stone on its paws.
Look at these stones. That is the big stones that were added in the New Kingdom.
And this stela also reveals a clue as to what the Sphinx meant to the New Kingdom Egyptians.
When the kings wanted to record something that they wanted to last forever, they would write in stone, and they would write on very large stela, such as this one, in hieroglyphs.
Kasia Spakalska translates 2 key hieroglyphs.
You can see there's something that looks like a bird there. That's actually the sign of the falcon. That's the name Horus.
Horus, depicted as a falcon, is one of the oldest and most important deities in the Egyptian pantheon. Egyptians believed that the pharaoh was Horus incarnate.
And just below is the Akhet, the horizon, with the 2 mountains on the side and the sun disk in between.
When the falcon and Akhet hieroglyphs are combined, they form Horus on the horizon, the name of an Egyptian god who guards the entrance to the afterlife. This is the identity of the Sphinx in the New Kingdom. To ancient Egyptians, the horizon was the entrance to the afterlife. Just as the sun sets over the horizon and rises the next day, they believed they too could be reborn. As the guardian to the afterlife, the Sphinx was crucial to that process. Thutmose, by clearing away the sands, was not just saving the Sphinx, he was saving a god. And he does more. Close inspection of the face of the Sphinx reveals traces of blue paint still clinging near its ear. The evidence suggests Thutmose gives the Sphinx a New Kingdom monumental makeover.
We're used to seeing the Sphinx as this beige-colored monument out in the desert. But when it was in its heyday, reborn in the New Kingdom, it was a very brightly painted image, painted in comic book colors. The face was probably red. It's possible that the headdress was painted yellow and blue. And this painting of the Sphinx was something that for the Egyptians probably brought it to life.
The Great Sphinx, revered as a god, guarding the entrance to the afterlife. A statue of its savior, Thutmose, overlooking a royal chapel nestled between its paws. Protected from the howling winds and sand by a tall retaining wall, and brought to life in vibrant color. But the New Kingdom, when Thutmose ruled, was over 1,000 years after the building of the Sphinx. To him, the Sphinx and whoever built it were already ancient history. So what did the Sphinx mean to its original builder? Either the father, Pharaoh Khufu, or his son, Khafre. Mark Lehner returns to the Sphinx Temple to solve the final mystery. The ruins of the temple sit just a few meters in front of the paws of the Sphinx.
We know from other temples.
There, Lehner finds a series of mysterious pillars.
They look a little bit like Stonehenge.
There are 24 of these pillars. Lehner believes they are linked to the 24 hours of the day.
It seems to have been a very early, massive temple to the sun.
This notion is reinforced by two inner sanctuaries at opposite ends of the temple.
This niche or sanctuary is symmetrical with another niche on the west. So the two niches define the temple axis, probably for the rising sun on the east and for the setting sun on the west.
At the spring and autumn equinox, the 2 days of the year when day and night are in perfect balance, the sun forms a line between the east and west sanctuaries of the temple. As the sun continues its path toward the horizon, it passes over the shoulder of the Sphinx and beyond to one of the Great Pyramids.
These two niches line up to the south side of the second pyramid at a point striking right over the Sphinx's shoulder. And this is where the sun sets at the equinoxes.
When it sets at those special times of the year, the sun connects the Sphinx temple to the pyramid of Khafre. And because the Sphinx temple and the Sphinx were part of the same engineering project, they must have been built by the same pharaoh.
And it's this line, this astronomical alignment, that's another clue that ties this temple and the Sphinx to the reign of Khafre, the builder of the second pyramid.
The sun also played a central role in Old Kingdom religion. Ancient Egyptian art depicts a god supporting the sun disk as it travels over the horizon to the afterlife. He was one of Egypt's earliest gods, the double lion Ruti. After adding up the evidence, the original meaning and identity of the Sphinx becomes clear. To its builders in the Old Kingdom, the The Sphinx as a lion was a symbol of the king. Like Ruti, the Sphinx was also a god, guardian of the horizon, the entrance to the afterlife. The solar alignment on the equinox reveals that the Sphinx, Sphinx Temple, and Khafre's pyramid are intimately connected. Their singular purpose was to ensure the pharaoh's safe passage to the afterlife. It is Khafre's face that adorns the Sphinx, which protected the mummified king as he traveled toward the pyramid, following the path of the sun over the horizon. Back in New England, Rick Brown and his team are finally completing their scaled-down Sphinx nose. They're putting on the finishing touches using replicas of ancient copper chisels in the hope of estimating how long it took to carve the Great Sphinx.
Hey, Rick.
Mark,
So you guys have been at it 2 weeks?
just over 2 weeks. All day long. Every day.
Every day? All day? Well, that's a pretty good-looking nose job. I'd like to know how many hours total it took for this nose, because that might give us an idea how long it took to carve the Great Sphinx.
Although Brown had resorted at times to using modern machinery to speed up the carving, he's gone to great lengths to work out how long it would have taken using just ancient tools.
And we calculated we could do 200 hits in 5 minutes over and over again and sustain that for an 8-hour day.
By measuring the amount of stone chipped away, he can calculate how much stone one worker could remove.
It would take 40 hours for one person to remove 1 cubic foot of stone.
Based on Lena's scale drawing, they calculate how much stone was removed from around the Sphinx.
That big block and that big block, you got those out of there.
From there, it takes a great deal of maths to get to the final figure for how long it would have taken to carve the whole Sphinx.
So now we can use this. Can we figure like 100 carvers?
that we're going.
Okay. And you come out with 1 million?
Around 1 million hours.
1 million person hours to carve the Great Sphinx. Well, that's impressive.
And if they spread that 1 million hours over 100 people, they come up with a rough
So it
estimate.
took 100 carvers, 3 years to carve the Sphinx.
100 carvers, 3 years.
But by carving the scaled-down nose, Brown and Lena have discovered that those 100 people for 3 years is just one part of a greater enterprise. To build the Great Sphinx, there must have been an army of people, cutting wood to stoke fires and forges,
Maybe more.
making tools, sharpening tools, running them back and forth, and pounding away at the giant rock that would become the Sphinx.
People was the power of Egyptian times. That's how they built the pyramids. That's how they built the Sphinx.
The people power used to build the Sphinx and the pyramids did more than just create monuments we still admire today.
Marshalling all their human and natural resources to create this monumental complex at Giza must have had a huge effect on the Egyptian state and its economy. The pyramids and the Sphinx did as much to build Egypt as the Egyptians did to build them.
Building the pyramids and the Sphinx actually built Egypt. And the clues to solving the riddle of the Sphinx were hidden in plain sight.
The record was in the geology. It was in the archaeological record. It was in the changes that the ancient Egyptians made to the landscape for building things like the Sphinx.
Animal, human, and God. Carved from the very earth and inspiring the imagination of people throughout time. The Great Sphinx has achieved the dreams